It's time for Game Jam! Okay, calm down. Not that kind of jam. Usually I join international game jams on itch.io, but this time things are a little different. I decided to join a local community jam in my hometown. It's smaller, more casual, but still just as exciting. And of course, I wanted to bring you along with me on this devlog journey. Day 1 started late in the evening, around 8 p.m., with the opening session. There was the usual rundown of the rules, the schedule, and most importantly, the theme reveal. The theme for this jam was prehistoric. Since the event ran pretty late, I decided not to start brainstorming right away. Instead, I called it a night and saved the idea generation for tomorrow. Day 2 was where the real brainstorming began. And finally, I got an idea. The game would start in a university classroom. The main character is a student, a bit sleepy during a lecture about prehistoric Egypt. Suddenly, the professor asks him a couple of questions. Whether the player answers correctly or not, the game continues. Later, the professor invites the student to his office to show him an artifact, but as soon as the student arrives, the artifact sends him back in time, straight to prehistoric Egypt. From there, the adventure begins. The player can't communicate with anyone because he doesn't understand their language. That's when he encounters an Egyptian god, a figure of knowledge, who guides him on a journey to recover missing hieroglyphs. Now here's the twist. Instead of a typical RPG adventure, the game takes the form of a card game. The cards themselves represent the gods. They act as units on the field. Meanwhile, the skills and divine powers are represented as spells and traps. So the journey of collecting hieroglyphs and meeting gods is translated into building your deck, summoning gods, and using their abilities in battles. Eventually, the player faces a final boss in an epic card battle, and after the fight, he takes on the responsibility of teaching hieroglyphs to the ancient civilization through a short mini-game where you literally draw them. The ending? A narrator explains that from that day on, ancient Egypt began to record their history. Then the screen fades back to the university classroom, completing the time loop. In other words, this is not just a time travel story, it's a predestined paradox, where the past only exists because the future was always meant to return and create it. On the third day, I finally opened Unity and started prototyping the card game idea, but it didn't take long for me to realize how complicated it really was. The card logic, the UI, the animations, it was simply too ambitious for a 5-day jam. So I thought of pivoting to a side-scroller, but even then, I felt it was a little too common, too generic. That's when I decided to settle on a top-down 3D adventure. Still simple enough for the jam, but unique enough to stand out. Here's the core vision. The player is sent back in time and meets 3 gods, Anubis, Thoth, and Osiris. Each of them gives a task and grants their divine power. With Anubis, the player must defeat skeletons and send them back to the afterlife. With Thoth, the player learns to communicate with the people of ancient Egypt, and with Osiris, the player restores life to barren lands, turning the desert into fertile soil. The powers are activated by reciting hieroglyphs, which means pressing number keys, 1 through 9, in the correct combination to form the name of each god. The main objective of the game is to transform the wasteland into fertile ground while surviving enemy attacks, and eventually the player faces a giant skeleton boss to progress further. The game takes place in a finite top-down 3D area, keeping the scope manageable, while still capturing the epic feel of the story. After setting the core gameplay vision, I immediately went on asset hunting. Of course, for a jam project, Kenny assets are my go-to choice. At the same time, I also started sketching ideas for the opening cutscene. Instead of going full animation, I thought it would be more manageable to present the story in a comic-style sequence, kind of like a motion comic, but I didn't stop there. To prepare for the next day, I also designed the essential UI and spell system visuals, health hearts, basic HUD, and most importantly, the hieroglyph sprites for each god's spell. Each spell requires 3 hieroglyph characters to be combined into the god's name: Anubis, Osiris, and Thoth. It was a lot of prep work, but by the end of day 3, the project felt like it had a solid foundation for real gameplay. Day 4 was when things finally came together inside Unity. I imported all the assets and started building a small prototype map. Then I worked on the basic player controls, walking, jumping, and even a dash mechanic. The dash was kind of a spontaneous idea, but it actually felt really fun to make the movement feel better. I also added a dust particle effect I found online. It gave a nice touch of feedback whenever the character moved, but of course, not everything went perfectly. For some reason, the character sometimes started spinning around when idle. I had no idea why it happened, and honestly, I just left it there. Bug feature, I guess. Next, I set up the enemies. Using navmesh and a simple state machine, I gave the skeletons their AI, idle, patrol, chase, attack, and of course, die. On the same day, I also started working on the god spells, the core mechanics that really define the game. First, Anubis's spell, I set up an area of effect attack with the numkey combination 972. When cast, it triggers a small explosion effect around the player. Any skeletons caught inside instantly get sent to the afterlife. Next was Osiris's spell. I placed what I call an altar of Osiris, though to be honest, it's just a banner object because I couldn't find a proper low-poly altar asset. Anyway, when the player casts the combination 413 near it, the barren desert transforms into fertile land, covered with grass and trees. I had prepared the green ground and tree objects beforehand, so they simply spawn in during the spell. Finally, Thoth's spell. For this, I created NPCs that would normally idle or patrol, but if the player casts the combination 568, the NPC will start following player, and once they reach an Osiris altar that's already been activated, the NPC stops following and instead settles there, patrolling or idling peacefully. To balance everything, I also gave the player health system. Each time they take damage, a heart is lost, and of course when all hearts are gone, it's game over. By the end of Day 4, the game was no longer just sketches and ideas, it was a playable prototype. Day 5 started with finishing the opening comic. Yesterday, it was just a sketch, but now I cleaned it up and implemented it directly into Unity. This became the intro cutscene, complete with the professor's questions at the beginning of the story. To be honest, there was something weird here. Whether you answered wrong or right, there was no actual consequence. But hey, this is a jam game. I didn't have much time to think about branching storylines. After the cutscene, I moved on to polishing the main map. I added multiple Osiris altars, more NPCs, and of course, more skeletons. Because if there's anything game devs love, it's increasing enemy count instead of balancing mechanics. Oh, and I made sure to add colliders to block the edges of the map, so the player can't just run away from responsibilities and go buy milk. Once the player enters the main scene, a simple tutorial panel pops up with the basic controls. Calling it a tutorial might be too generous, but at least it's there. I also added small details, like icons that appear over the player's head when near an altar or NPC, plus sound effects and background music to make everything feel more alive. Finally, I wrapped up the day by adding a game over panel when the player dies, and an ending cutscene when all objectives are completed. With that, the game now had a beginning, a middle, and an end. Not bad for a day's work. Day 6 started early. I spent the morning recording a full gameplay run, writing a simple GDD, and taking some screenshots for the itch.io page. As for the final boss, yeah, that didn't make it in. I could have forced it, but the deadline was only a few hours away. And as they say, a good game is a finished game. So I wrapped up what I had, uploaded everything, and clicked publish. Done. 6 days of chaos, bugs, late nights, and gods of Egypt. And guess what? I didn't win. Honestly, I kind of expected that. The cutscenes were way too simple. There wasn't really a proper tutorial, and of course the scope was still a bit rough around the edges. But you know what? I'm still proud. I managed to bring Sand of Egypt to life, with its unique mechanics, lore, and that whole hieroglyph spell system. And for me, that already feels like a big step forward. It makes me feel one step closer to making the kind of cozy yet unique games I've always admired, like Detective Duck or even Animal Crossing. So yeah, no trophy this time, but still a victory in my book. Anyway, Thanks for sticking around and watching this whole journey. I've got more projects in mind, so who knows, maybe the next one will be even bigger, or at least less buggy. Haha, see you in the next devlog.